I'm Suveen Mathaudu. I'm a professor of mechanical engineering and material science and engineering at University of California, Riverside, and also a big fan of superhero science. And so today I'm going to kind of walk you through some of the stories of material science over the time and how they tie into superheroes, but also some other things that I feel are really important for the future of science. So the first thing I'll say is that everything is connected. You know, Erlangen and Riverside are actually connected. We're sister cities, which you guys may or may not have known. So if I look at this sign, I grew up in Riverside. I've always seen Erlangen long before I knew where it was. And you guys may have seen this, or probably not. And Riverside is right down here. Riverside, USA is a sister city. So it's great to be here. I'm a professor. Let's start with a quiz. You guys all like quizzes, right? Let me ask you, which is the strongest material? Not the strongest character, the strongest material. We'll have Wolverine's claws, Thor's hammer, or Captain America's shield, right here in the corner. So, how many think it's the Wolverine's claws? Maybe 5, 6. Thor's hammer? Yeah, it's like back at home, mostly ladies. You like him holding the hammer. And the shield? All right, shield overwhelmingly. And how many just don't even know or don't care? You're just here with your kids. Okay. So the first thing I'll talk about is what is material science and engineering. Many have heard of mechanical engineering, electrical engineering, civil engineering. Material science and engineering is a field that makes new materials like Captain America's shield or her sword through connections between processing, structure, properties, and performance. How are these connected? I probably sound like a professor to you. You're like, what does that mean? Let me put it in terms that you can understand. All right. Potatoes, salt, and oil. How many different things can you make that you eat? Chips, tater tots, fried potatoes, French fries. All of those have different tastes, textures, flavors because of the way that they're heated, cooked, temperatures, time. Material scientists take the elements of the world and we make materials in the same way. I've been here for 3 days. I think I've eaten potatoes 10 different ways. And cabbage. Lots of cabbage. Okay, let me make an even clearer German analogy, something I learned about 2 days ago. Reinheitsgebot. Like, you can only use 3 things. And that was even before they knew what yeast was. You know, now you can use 4 things. Otherwise, das ist nicht Bier. Yeah, I just learned about it. It's fascinating. And I learned about it that there was competition between brewers and bakers. That's why they decided to do this. Like, quit taking our ingredients. Okay, so what material scientists do is we take the elements on the periodic table, like iron, like magnesium, like aluminum, and we mix them with different things and turn them into useful things, like your phones, your cars, the desks, like the camera, breaking the fourth wall. We make all different kinds of alloys and materials, including plastics, glasses, metals, ceramics, and all of those are researched in an institute like this one that you're in today, right here. So we can make brass alloys, bronze, iron. All of these things are by combining these at time, temperature, pressure, and new ways to make new things. So let's talk about material science over history before we get into comic history. Materials at this point in time were things like stones, bone, teeth, skin. Those are the trees, wood. These were the things that people built around the world. And eventually somebody figured out how to make a better sword and a better shield out of bronze. And they started becoming more technologically developed than the people who were using stones and bones. And then someone figured out how to take iron and carbon and make steels and iron, and they made better swords and shields. And now we're making all kinds of new materials that dominate the world around us. Every new technology needs new materials, whether it be your phone battery, case, car, whatever it may be. So if we look at this map of the importance of materials over time, we see the 4 general classes of materials: metals, polymers, composites, and ceramics. And what we see is that from the 1940s, like to the 1970s, the biggest band right here is metals, superalloys, titanium, new metals and materials. And these were mostly being developed for the war. There was all kinds of commodities that went back and forth that didn't when the war started, and so lots of metals research got developed. And this is the exact time that many of the comic book heroes that you know were created. So some of the things that people learned from comic books back in that time were science, because they didn't have as many TVs and movies and things like that. So they would read comic books and learn about science, but not just directly science. They would learn it from cool characters like the Metal Men. So the Metal Men, these were from DC Comics. They would pair up with Superman and Batman. Metal Men would behave like the metal they were made out of. So gold would stretch, and he was very lofty and high, and lead was big and tall and tough and heavy, and iron was in the middle, and things were sexist back then. So Tina, Platinum, just fell in love with the creator. That's all she did. Things are changing. Things are seriously changing, and I'm going to get back to that again. But these metal men would do things that metals do. The Metal Men eventually ended up being rebooted in 2014, and this is where I used to work, Army Research Lab. And you think the labs that you see here are cool. That's not what my lab looked like, I promise. So this is an example of the newer Metal Men, where they're dealing with Cyborg, who you may have seen in the movie, wondering what metal is he actually made of. Now here's another example. Mr. 103 could turn into any of the 103 elements that were on the periodic table. So to escape the Doom Patrol, he turns from neon gas into magnesium, and he uses the magnesium arm to punch through the window, and then he escapes through again. How many elements are on the periodic table now? You know? 118. Bang! Right, 118. You think he has to change his suit each time? Like, every time a new element gets discovered, he's like, shoot, I got to make a new suit. Like, okay, this guy, we're not going to see him in a movie anytime soon. When I grew up, everything was animal, vegetable, or mineral. He could turn into any creature made out of animal, vegetable, or mineral. I'll ask Eric, Professor Bitzek, the same question I asked last time. How many vegetables have I eaten in Germany? 2. Potatoes and cabbage. And potato's not even a vegetable, it's a legume. But you guys probably count it as a vegetable, right? Yeah, my daughter, she's 3. I tell her that French fries are a vegetable too. Her mom loves that. Okay, now we're getting into characters that you may be more familiar with. Tony Stark, Iron Man. Iron Man came out, these issues came out in 65 and 66. It was when the U.S. was in the middle of the Cold War with the Soviet Union, and he would fight Boris Bulsky, the Titanium Man. And Titanium Man didn't even have a powered suit. He just wore a suit made out of titanium, and he was strong enough to fight Iron Man, and he would often beat him with a very technologically advanced trick called a magnet. You know, if you're going to make your suit out of iron, you got to think about what you... Magnet versus Iron Man, not a really good match. Okay, this one's a little bit hard to see, but this is the Fantastic Four fighting Sandman, who's made out of sand. They decide they want to destroy him, so the Human Torch hits him with temperature. Sue Storm puts a pressure field around him, and what happens when you take sand and expose it to temperature and pressure? You make glass, silica glass. And so here he turns into a living crystal, which is a comic book example of real material science. Okay, here's another one. These are the elements of doom. They were products of a nuclear reactor in Russia that went bad. This was 6 years before Chernobyl, so it wasn't too soon. It was actually way before. And these were all elements that were in the reactor, including graphite, which caused a lot of problems in Chernobyl. So we had phosphorus and vanadium and zirconium. And when Captain America throws his shield at carbon, carbon undergoes what's called an allotropic transformation. What else can carbon convert to other than people? Diamonds. So diamond is the hardest material that we know of. Carbon converts into diamond form and the shield bounces off. Probably because he didn't know what a nanotube was or what graphene was. Probably would have turned into graphene now. And I wonder if they sat around like at some meeting and they're like, what should we call ourselves? Elements of Doom. That sounds like a good name. We'll call our team the Elements of Doom. Okay, now we have a newer example where we have, again, our guy in an iron suit fighting Magneto, who can control all of magnetism. And you wonder how this could ever be a fair fight. And Iron Man claims it's because his suit is made out of carbon nanotubes, which means that the writer's reading something, but he doesn't know anything about what's called Maxwell's laws. Kids, ask your parents about Maxwell's laws. Parents, go to Google. And you'll find out that everything is magnetic, and there's nothing that's not magnetic. Because Google is the source of all real science, I promise. Okay, so let's get back to the story. What's the strongest material? Maybe it's none of the ones that I told you about. Maybe it's these pants. It doesn't matter how big Hulk gets in any of the movies. His shirt always comes off. His socks always come off. His underwear probably rips underneath. But the pants, purple pants. He has a store where he buys purple pants. How many people in this room have purple pants? Nobody. The purple pants always survive. Some high-strength materials. Now, I've been walking around the streets of Erlangen and Nürnberg. I've noticed that we have a trend here that's the same as in the U.S. People like wearing really tight jeans. It's not really good for the future of humanity, but they do anyways. If the Hulk were created today, we'd probably end up with something like this. With those pants. So Stan Lee, someone asked him once, how do you make all of these suits do different things? How do you make a suit that's resistant to fire, or that can become invisible, or that can stretch way more than it needs to be? And he made up this theory. He just said, well, let's just say that they're made of unstable molecules. And that's kind of carried through this idea of unstable molecules occupying the suits. But for real future materials, for like Eric Stock, he's going to talk about jet turbine engines. We need things that are stable. We need them stable at temperatures. We need them stable under the ocean. We need them stable in space. We need them stable in environments that we can't get to. And that's going to take some new engineering. You see a lot of that going on here. How to not engender no stability, but making things stable. So Wonder Woman's bracelets were advertised. There's not a lot of science between Wonder Woman's bracelets because of the crazy story that was behind them. DC Comics used to make up their characters after Greek gods and mythology, whereas Marvel would use science in their backstories. And so the real story behind the bracelets is that they were made of a shield made of leather, made of a goat that Zeus drank the milk from when he was a baby. I don't know how to explain the science of that to you guys today, but what I can tell you is, one, that the movie was cool, and two, may I have permission to move you? Because I don't want to touch you without your permission. This rope. What does the rope do? Lasso of what? Truth. So William Moulton Marston was the creator of Wonder Woman. He was also a scientist with his two wives. Yeah, he had two wives. They were both scientists as well. And they all co-created the first lie detector. So the lasso of truth is actually based off the technology that they used to develop the initial lie detectors. And there is some science behind that. And the shackles were made to resemble breaking shackles of freedom. He didn't like the idea that women had to be subservient to everyone. And he said that those were initially called the shackles of submission that were broken by the Amazons, and that represented what they could do. But they can block bullets too. Okay, now let's get back to Captain America's shield. I am at the moment not really pro-American. I'm not going to go into the details of that, but I am certainly anti-Nazi, and I'm pro-punching Hitler. And this is the first cover of Captain America that depicted Captain America punching Hitler. Stan Lee's full name is Stanley Leibovitz. He was a Jewish American. He and Kirby were both Jewish Americans, and they wanted to tell this important story of fighting hatred. And so the shield became an iconic part of the story. We've seen it in the movies. It does amazing things. It doesn't behave the laws of physics. In the movie, it was made out of vibranium. In the comic book, it was made by an Army engineer named Myron McLean to make better tank materials to fight Hydra and the Panzer divisions in Europe. So they wanted to make a prototype of a tank hatch. It wasn't supposed to be a shield. It was supposed to be the hatch of a tank. And so he went back into his lab, which may not look too different from any of the labs you guys could tour here tonight. And this is very, very tiny writing, but he's telling the story of how he wanted to use vibranium and steel and a mystery element to make this new material. And what happened is when he went to his lab, he did what I do, what my students do. He fell asleep in his lab. The mystery element fell in. And yeah, you know, the trick to being in labs, if you guys want to be if you want to come and be a scientist here at FAU, the trick to getting a superpower is to just have a lab accident. Like Spider-Man, lab accident. Captain America, lab accident. Hulk, lab accident. Lab accidents give you superpowers. There, I'm done. Thank you. All right, so he fell asleep. And this element fell in, and he couldn't figure out how to create it again, which is really a tragedy because we have cool microscopes across the street that you can see individual atoms with. We have simulations that tell us what a material does ever before you can physically make it. We have tools and techniques where nobody should say, well, I couldn't figure out how to do it. I could never make it again. But that's what Myron McLean did. You know, he couldn't ever remake this shield in the comic book. Now, as I said, everybody has microscopes. Batman often uses microscopes. Electron microscopes use electrons instead of light to look at things. And believe it or not, Batman has an electron microscope in his Batcave. He has the penny, he has the dinosaur, he has all of those things, and he has a pretty cool lab. You know, if you can't get your research done here, go find the Batcave. Okay, now let's talk about Wolverine's bone coating. We see that here in the corner. We see the claws, but also the bones. Wolverine's initial mutation was bone claws and healing, but the bones were coated by a metal in the Weapon X project. And here's this like crazy recipe for the processing structure property that I was talking about. Like this completely nonsensical, yet it could seem real to someone, recipe for being able to make this super cool metal. So you guys, Wolverine is a favorite character of many. The claws cut through almost anything, different kinds of steels. They can even survive in hell. Like here, Wolverine was able to survive in hell. I grew up learning that hell was hellfire and brimstone. Anybody know what brimstone is? Element? Sulfur. Brimstone is another word for sulfur. What's the melting point of sulfur? It's 115 C. It's like global warming. It's not that bad. It's bad. Global warming is really, really, really bad. Can you edit that off the camera? Someone's going to take that one piece and be like, he's American and he thinks global warming's not bad. Okay, now if we read this comic panel, you see that you have adamantium claws striking adamantium plus shield. The comic book story behind the claws was that Myron McLean kept on trying to make the shield. He didn't know what the mystery element was, and so mixing vibranium and steel, he was only able to make adamantium. So it was kind of a second-rate version of the steel alloy. So far we know from the comic books that the shield would beat the claws just based on the lack of that little pixie dust element that fell in. Okay, now let's talk about the hammer versus the shield. So the comic books again give this kind of nonsensical description that could seem to be real, where it says it's like badly wrought iron. If you want to see what badly wrought iron is, go out and do the forging outside, the forging demonstrations. It's still fun, even if it's badly wrought. It's highly malleable. It requires extreme methods to forge it, like the heart of a star or an enchanted forge. So for extreme materials, you often need extreme conditions. Hulk, I still think he's the strongest, and his pants are the strongest. I did a math equation just based on him being under 150 billion tons, and this is like the pressure at the core of the Earth. So he would survive quite a bit. Superman used to do allotropic phase transformations with his hands. He would just squeeze the diamonds, and squeeze the coal and turn it into diamonds and give it to shop owners to help them pay their rent for a month. Here's an example of what dwarf star material would weigh. It's a key that weighs 500,000 tons. This is what a dwarf star or neutron star could weigh. And here's an example of the dwarves forging the hammer. So you guys saw the scene in Avengers Infinity War where he made Stormbreaker? I consulted on that scene, and I'm so ashamed because there's so many things wrong with it. It's not forging, it's casting. All right, so Neil deGrasse Tyson, how many people know who this guy is? He's a advocate of science. He has a great podcast. He also did something that a lot of us are still bitter about. He was part of the team that got rid of Pluto. How many of you grew up with Pluto as a planet, right? And how many of you are angry that Pluto's not a planet anymore? Right? Like all the acronyms, it's a ball of ice in space, but we still call it a planet. We don't care. Pluto's a planet. But he's the one who kind of got rid of it. So he's not right all the time, but he was right that time. He said that if Thor's hammer is made of neutron star matter, as implied by legend, it weighs as much as a herd of 300 billion elephants. Made of a neutron star. You guys should already see what's wrong. So I did a density calculation. I did it based on Indian elephants. No preference, I just picked. And this density, you know what this means? This is 1 trillion tons in something the size that's this big. 1 trillion tons. That's quite a bit. And there's real materials in the universe that weigh that much. But I disagreed with him because my common sense was tingling. It just didn't seem right to me. And there's no other Deadpool slides here because there's children in there. So I wrote an article with a friend, and that article seemed to catch some attention with people, including things like, sorry you're wrong, time to recalculate. I've never been called a scientific heavyweight, but they did. And I like this one too. New research suggests. I went back in my lab and tried to do something with it. And in the last lecture, we figured out that this was not German, it's Dutch. Now I know. So he actually incorporated this stuff into his lectures, and he ended up admitting that he was wrong and that he should leave it to the expert. It actually just weighs about 42 pounds. It says right there. And density is somewhere between magnesium and aluminum. So it's not that dense. But we still continue to argue about why it behaves the way that it does. There's the Nobel Prize I won for my discovery of the density of Thor's hammer. It's a real Nobel Prize. It's not mine. It's a lot of gold to be carrying around. It was a colleague whose father won the Nobel Prize for neutron diffraction. You can Google that too. Okay, so hammer versus shield. The shield wins. So I think the majority kind of got it according to this rough analysis. But we also see something really cool here. When one thing impacts another thing, a number of things can happen. One is it can deform. The other is it can make noise. The other is that it can heat up. But in cases where a lot of energy is released, it can also release in the form of light. It's called somoluminescence. It actually happens in a very tiny creature that lives under the sea called a pistol shrimp. So the pistol shrimp will cock its claw back under the ocean. When it releases it, it produces a shock wave in the center of its claw. It gets up to 10,000 degrees Kelvin, and it shoots a blast wave that will kill the fish across from it. It's called a pistol shrimp. Look it up when you go home. It's a pretty amazing thing. Yeah, that's what it looks like. Okay, more evidence that my theory is correct. Secret footage from the Avengers. Does that look like it weighs as much as 300 billion elephants? Sorry, Tyson, you're wrong. All right, the shield wins. Okay, now I'm going to speed through some other lessons that I think are important for science and engineering. When you think of what a scientist and engineer looks like, you often think of kind of the same thing. You might think of these guys, right? I don't think they're funny, but some of you might. This guy, wrong. This guy, from this country, yeah, people think of him as being a scientist, kind of like the old frizzy hair white guy, right? Stephen Hawking. I had the opportunity to interact with Stephen Hawking, and it was amazing, but as a hologram. He was projected into a Star Talk panel that I did. This is Chris Hadfield, Commander Chris Hadfield. He's on the Canadian $5 bill on the back of it because he did 5 trips to the space station, lived out there for a long time. And we were talking about materials and technologies that would need to get out to space. What kind of things would we need that would survive temperature, radiation, impact from micrometeorites? And it was a wonderful conversation with Stephen Hawking, and then about 2 months later, he passed away. So, loss of a great mind. Well, what if I were to tell you that Emmett is an engineer? You know, he takes the materials and he builds the world around him. For those of you who watched the Lego movie. I know Playmobil is from around here. I haven't watched that yet. I'll watch it on the plane on the way back. Iron Man is an engineer. You know, he's one of the smartest guys in both the comics and in the movies. He builds his own suits. He makes his own power supplies. You know, he creates elements. He does all kinds of amazing things, and he uses his mind to be able to do it. Even Spider-Man is a scientist and an engineer. Stan Lee said that he gave him his powers, but he also made him design his own web and his shooters to show that his intellect was just important. So in most of the movies, he actually has to use his ingenuity to be able to make the web shooters and the spider web. Fantastic Four, not fantastic movies. They were all explorers that were going into space, that were exposed to radiation to get their powers. The Hulk, physicist. But in the Avengers movies, you see him using his brain as Bruce Banner quite a bit as well. It's not just Hulk smashing things. It's Bruce Banner using his scientific ingenuity to be able to solve problems. And Batman, is Batman an engineer? No, but he can afford engineers. So all of our research has to get paid by someone. Eric's research has to be paid for by someone. I have to be paid by someone to do my research. It takes money and investment to build the kind of cool technologies and labs you see around you. Sometimes it's someone like Bruce Wayne who builds fantastic vehicles. Even his suit is a marvel of like materials engineering. Like this is kind of the estimated cost of all of the advanced materials that would be needed to build his suit. And all of these were created in some lab by some students or professors or people who were working hard to advance the state of science and materials. Okay, this is the Batman I grew up with. He had things like bat shark repellent. Bat shark, you know, have you guys, who remembers the bat shark repellent? Like two of you. In the old 1966 Batman movie, he pulls a bat shark repellent out of his belt and sprays it on a fake rubber shark that's hanging off his leg. It's the most terrible scene. But the bat shark repellent is real. In World War II, Julia Child was not yet a chef. She was a chemist for the British government, and she made a chemical that sharks thought smelled like another shark dying. Because if something's killing a shark, other sharks don't want to be there. It was a copper compound, and the British Army used that to keep sharks and animals away from a lot of the undersea devices that they were being used at the time. So yeah, shark repellent is real, and it was made by like one of the best chefs of all time. Okay, so Batman has his labs, and the people that are doing the work have advanced degrees. We have doctors like Dr. Doom and Professor X and Dr. Strange. All of these people have gone to school and chosen to use their titles for both good and evil. Okay, so money is a pretty good superpower, but for both of these guys, it's the engineering that really gets them to do what they do. Now, there's a lot of other connections between superheroes and engineers and scientists and mathematicians. One is that a lot of them just want to do good for society and make society a better place. Right now, we're working on things that will give us clean energy, clean water, clean transportation, feed people that need to be fed, advance our life and health. These are the main missions of what many people want to do when they get into science or engineering, just make the world a better place. There's a moral code. You want to do the right thing. You don't want to let a mistake occur in a plane or a car or anything that you design if you know something bad's going to happen. You get to learn extra skills and deal with advanced technology and equipment. And let's face it, if you go into a scientific degree, you're probably going to make a lot more money than, say, if you did like philosophy or... No knock on philosophers. Philosophers created science using logic and reason, but they still probably didn't make money doing it. And then, you know, we have a generation that wants to take pictures of everything. Concerts, pictures, Instagram, selfies. Even on the train today, all I heard was Instagram. You know, they want to take pictures and do things for themselves. Superheroes have secret identities. And most real engineers have secret identities as well. You don't know who they are. They're doing good for the sake of doing good. Okay, the other thing that I think is important is role models. Like sidekicks. Find a sidekick. If you're a college student, if you're a professor, you're mentoring students, college students, go find a high school student, go find an elementary school student. Mentor at every step along the way to give people opportunities to grow, because oftentimes people get interested in science, but they lose interest because they're not connected to anyone that can mentor them through the process. They may not have friends or family that can do that. So here's the original Captain America and Bucky Barnes. Here's one of my favorites, Fallout Boy and Radioactive Man. Oh, then we have the young Teen Titans. All of these are examples of mentoring. 3, the face of science is changing. If I tell you to imagine some of the characters we talked about so far, like Captain America, Wolverine, Thor, Spider-Man, you probably have a picture in your face, and they're all pretty homogenous. They're all kind of like perfect-looking white people in the original comics, because that's what it was written as. But if you look around the room, if you look around society, that doesn't depict what society really looks like. And society is changing in a way that inclusion and depictions of people are important for young kids to see when they're growing up. So this is the new Captain America. Spoiler, but at the end of the Endgame movie, Captain America gives his shield to Falcon. It's been like this a long time in the comics. This is Spider-Man. This is Ultimate Universe Spider-Man, Miles Morales. He's an African Hispanic teen from New York. This is Iceman. Iceman is one of the X-Men, and he was written into the comics as being a gay character. There truly is room for everybody when we're talking about inclusion in science and STEM. Disabilities. This is Daredevil, who can use his super sense of hearing to find the world around him. Even the Hulk. The Hulk in the comic books is now a character named Amadeus Cho, who's a Korean-American teen. And now getting to someone who you guys are well familiar with, one of my favorite characters, T'Challa, Black Panther. In the comic books, he's actually a physicist who has a PhD from Oxford. So his intellect is shown just as much as his ability to lead his country and be Black Panther. This metal will change the world, vibranium. This is not a real cover, of course. And if you think vibranium is real, I read this in an airline magazine. Apparently these shoes disobey the laws of physics. They absorb shock from the ground, convert it into renewed energy, and positive in your step. It works just like vibranium. And he was actually on the cover of it. Here's some fake scientific images. Don't ever buy shoes from an airline magazine. There's a better place to get shoes. Okay, lesson 4. I have a 3-year-old daughter. I want the world to be a better place for her. If she wants to be a scientist or an engineer, I don't want there to be any barriers in her way, cultural or non-cultural. This is what happens in the US to women and men in science. And it's absolutely horrid that as careers progress, the number of women decrease and the number of men decrease. And there's no practical reason for this to be the case except that we have not made science and engineering a welcoming place for young ladies. When they want to have families, when all these kinds of things come into play, when there's 1 in 100 employees, it's not the place that they often want to be. So this is not the way that things should be. Comics has been changing for a while, but I decided to do something after I saw this. This little girl was pretty ticked off because she saw these toys and it said, "Fun gifts for boys." And I decided to go on a mission of finding things that were unnecessarily gendered. So here we have toothpaste for men, because men's teeth are different. Globes, a pink globe versus a blue globe. Man-sized Kleenex. Why? Do we produce more snot? Has anyone really done the statistics on that? What about this? Coat hangers, bread, umbrellas. This is the worst. Men get overnight relief, but for women it's dependable overnight relief. And for men it's gentle and predictable. For women it's gentle enough for sensitive stomachs. And the worst is that women get 10 less for the same price as the men do. Completely unnecessarily gendered product. This is where it gets bad. Why? These are real pictures that I've taken in stores. Why does society put out things that say gorgeous versus clever, or super versus I hate my thighs, or boy genius versus ready for my selfie? What are we projecting to our young people about science that does functionally the same thing? Every one of you looks at this and says, that's stupid and crazy. But we're doing something like this in science and engineering, and it has to stop. Whatever we're doing has to stop. So I would like my little girl to wear something like this, if she wanted to wear it. Whatever she wants to do. I want a future where there's no barriers for her. So in the next Thor movie, it's actually going to be Natalie Portman. Natalie Portman is going to be Thor. Thor is whoever has the hammer. Whoever the hammer feels is worthy becomes Thor. Not She-Thor, not Thor Girl, not Miss Thor, not Lady Thor. She will be Thor, and the other guy will just become Odin's son. This is the first superhero that looks like me, Kamala Kahn. And like I said, representation is important. For our young women to want to be in science, they have to see female scientists out there doing the work. Here's the new Wolverine. She took over for her dad when her dad died, the original Wolverine. And here's the next Wolverine. My daughter Leia, a few years ago, she's 3 now. Fake cigar, promise. Yeah, she doesn't like being strapped to me anymore. And then we have characters like this character. She's one of the new Iron Man characters. In the comics, she's a 16-year-old teen that goes to MIT and is studying engineering. And this is now the smartest girl in the Marvel universe. This is known as Moon Girl. She rides Devil Dinosaur, and she is the smartest character in the Marvel universe now. And then back again to my favorite country of Wakanda. She's consistently telling the people in the movie, like Bruce Banner and Tony Stark and the Hulk, how wrong they are about things. Depiction and representation in science is important in the same way it's important for young ladies to see all of these characters in their comic books and their media and realize I can be strong and independent like that. So this is I believe the future of science. It's part of what I wanted to include. This is also what occupies my brain. This is the part that pays the bills. This one I'm working on. Eric has firsthand seen this part right here. I hope you learned a little bit something today and you found something new. I'm here afterwards to talk to you. We have a few minutes. Thank you guys for coming and paying attention. You can return to your evil activities.